Good morning. Our reading this morning comes from Genesis 32, verses 22 to 30. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared."
Before we get started with the sermon this morning, is this on? Can you turn up the wireless? Test, test. Oh, there it is. Okay. Hold on. There we go. Okay, before we get started, a colleague of mine and I have been reading a book about spiritual formation within Christian community and sort of healthy things that churches do. And when churches are healthy, what do? And one of the things they came up with, or they have observed in churches, is that churches that are healthy are places that people are, of course, happy to be in. But it's not because they're friendly. You can be a friendly church and be a pretty cold church. I think some of us have probably been to churches that were friendly in the sense that you got greeted on the way in the door, but there wasn't a warmness to the group, there wasn't a fellowship. And even when it's healthy and when it's good, when you visit another church, it's different than home, isn't it? Somehow it's tangibly different, the experience of coming into a group that is truly home and truly welcoming and people that really get you. It's kind of like when you walk home into your actual own house. They've observed that churches that are healthy are places that are filled with joy, not necessarily happiness. So joy, there's that piece. And there's hesed, which we've talked about before. It's the loving kindness that we read about in the Old Testament. And so through deep research and so on, they come up with a couple of spiritual practices. And so my friend and I have decided we're going to do an experiment this week. He and his church, me and my church, we're going to both do this thing. And then this week we're going to talk about it and see if it worked. And so it is simply this. Joy comes from the experience of seeing someone who's happy to see you or happy that you're there. And so if you think about this, it starts to make sense. Because when you come home, what gives you joy when you come home? It's when somebody there is happy to see you. When you walk in your front door, somebody pokes their head around the corner and looks you in the eye and has a facial expression that is nice. And it's just sort of this feeling of, oh, someone's glad to see me. This is one of the best parts of getting a dog, is that now, when I'm home, even when nobody's home, it's like the Queen of England has arrived. You come running up, you're almost incontinent. You're so excited that you're here. Now, hopefully we won't necessarily have that problem this morning, but what I would like you to do this morning is a practice. It's called a joy practice, and it is something that cultivates joy in the same way that you would do exercises to help your cardiovascular health, to make yourself more fit. I want to do a joy practice this morning. And I know some of you are resistant to this. And it's because you live in a low joy state, and that's a whole other thing. You can read the book if you want to know more about it. But I want you to indulge me this morning with a joy practice. It's really simple. So what I want to do here is I want you to turn around or look left, right, or whatever direction you need to look in order to see someone that you didn't ride to church in the car with. So not a person you were in the car with this morning. So you got to find that person, and I want you to turn to them and look them in the eyes. And one thing I want you to notice is you're already smiling. So that's great. That's good news. I want you to look them in the eye and tell them, I am happy that you're here. And then the other person would then reciprocate. Okay? So take 30 seconds and just turn to a person you didn't drive with, look them in the eye, and say, I'm happy you're here. Well, we're doing an experiment. I think we're almost done. Okay. All right. Massive success. So I'm going to go back to my friend and tell him that at least here that worked amazingly well. There's something about seeing someone and just expressing that joy and seeing somebody else expressing that joy of you just being glad that you're here. The research shows that people want to be in a place where they are wanted. And that they are anticipated and that they are loved. I'll have more to say about that over the next couple of weeks. Okay, so let's continue in our series. We're continuing in our Saying No to God series, and we have kind of an interesting story this week that I would like to talk about, the story of Jacob. Have you ever crossed paths with someone that just seems to always do things the hard way? Do you have someone in your family like that just always seems to have to do things the hard way? They have to touch the stove to experience and find out that it's hot. They only seem to learn lessons if they can do them the long way. No matter how much advice you give them, no matter how much you try to help, no matter how many warnings they get, they seem to only grow through struggle. Maybe that person is somebody you know, or maybe that person is one of your kids, or someone else in your family. Or maybe, if we're honest, that person is you. Jacob, the twin son of Isaac, was one of those people. He was a con artist that finally got conned. He was a liar that got lied to. He was a manipulator that finally got manipulated. Jacob wrestled with people. Jacob wrestled with circumstances. And finally, in our story this morning, Jacob wrestled with God himself. Now, this is not so much a story this morning about someone who said no to God. Rather, this sermon is a little different. This morning, I want to talk about how while God is not looking for a no, at the same time, God invites the struggle. Almost. God invites honest questions. God desires our passions and our sincere and honest hearts. For that, in that struggle, God's real transformation takes place. Now, if we were to open our Bibles to our text this morning and back up a little bit, back up to chapter 25, we would pick up the beginning of Jacob's story. And we would see that Jacob wrestling with God, that was not just a one-time incident, but actually wrestling and striving and struggling is a recurring theme in the story of Jacob. It starts before he's even born. We're told that Isaac and Rebekah struggle to have a baby, struggle to have a family, and then when Rebekah finally does get pregnant, they're literally fighting before they're even born. Out comes Esau, and Jacob is clasped onto him. The two of them come at the same time. Imagine delivering twins at the same time in a day before ultrasounds. That would be absolutely unbelievable. But the struggle starts there and continues for Jacob. It continues throughout his whole life, either physically or figuratively. Jacob continues to struggle with this brother Esau and finagles him out of his birthright. Jacob tricks his father into giving him the father's blessing. And then when his life's in danger, he runs away to live with his uncle Laban, but the struggle continues. His uncle cheats him, and he tries to cheat his uncle. He wants to marry Rachel and marries Leah also. Then he struggles with his uncle over the flocks and getting paid for the 20 years of labor that he provides to his uncle. It seems like in every encounter, at every turn that Jacob has, he brings this struggle, this wrestling. It's just constantly what he's doing. There's even a clever play on words in our text this morning. The Hebrew word for wrestle is avak. And this same root word is found in the name of the river that's mentioned in the story. It's the Yabok River, which is also related to Jacob's name in Hebrew, which is Yaakov. When God meets Jacob there at the river, he wrestles with him. Of course he did. He always does. Jacob is always striving. That's constantly where he's at. And the reason he's struggling in this story, in particular with regards to his birthright and with regards to his father's blessing, is because he's unwilling to trust God. He's unwilling to trust God to come through, or God to be faithful in the things that matter. And so he's always wanting to just kind of make sure things are right. Make sure he's prepared for all contingencies. Jacob is a guy that if it's going to get done right, he's got to do it himself. Jacob is a guy who has to do things on his own terms and in his own strength. And instead of relying on God to provide what he needs, now it's not the same as saying no to God, but maybe it's more like a no thanks, I've got this, is what Jacob does. The wrestling match that we see in our text this morning is symbolic of Jacob's whole life. Jacob's been striving his whole life in his own strength. And from a human standpoint, Jacob's been pretty successful up to this point. He has, at this point in the story, 12 kids, 11 sons no less. He has abundant flocks and herds he's trying to buy Esau off with. He is successful, and so figuratively speaking, this mystery man is unable to overcome him. Well, at least at first. But then take a look at verse 25 in chapter 32. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched, and he wrestled with the man. So as morning breaks, God touches Jacob's hip and dislocates it. Now, what's significant about this? The hip, no less. Well, the hip is the strongest joint in the human body as far as power and leverage and force. And it is certainly the location of the greatest strength for a wrestler. Without a hip, without a strong hip, you can't pivot, you can't turn, you can't stay in control. You can't prevail, at least not on your own strength. Through this touch, Jacob realized that it's no man that he's wrestling with, but God himself. With just a touch, he is overcome. He can no longer struggle against this man on his own strength. But look at what he does here in this story. When Jacob loses that strength, when he loses the power in his body, he doesn't curse the man. He doesn't throw a flag on the play and cry foul. He doesn't think somehow he's been cheated. But instead, Jacob invests that same energy, that same tenacity that he's known with into seeking a blessing. He will not let go until God blesses him. It's at that point that Jacob discovers who he really is. He is Jacob the deceiver, the wrestler who's always worked from his own strength, but now God gives him this new name, Israel. When his strength is taken away, in that moment, he is now Israel, one who clings to God, one who has wrestled with God and with man and prevailed. But now he walks with a limp. We're told here in the text that he walks with a limp for the rest of his life. With this new gait, with this new way of walking, Jacob crosses over the river Jabbok, which is the border of the land that his ancestors lived in and the promised land. He crosses into the promised land, and immediately he begins to receive the blessings of the one with whom he has struggled for so many years. In the same way, we don't enter the land of promise, so to speak, on our own strength. No matter how seemingly successful we are, we have not managed on our own power. Even if you seem to have it all together, your ultimate eternal success does not come from your own goodness. It does not come from your own strength and your own skill. On the flip side, this morning, if your life's a mess, if it is an absolute train wreck, not all hope is lost, because that's not where victory is found. Jacob, in his story, was not the source of his own success. Jacob was not even the main character in his own story. It was God who is the main character of the story of Jacob. It was God who opened the wombs of both Leah and Rachel. It was God that opened the wombs of Sarah and Rebekah. It was God who delivered the great abundance of Laban into Jacob's hand. It was God who delivered Jacob from retaliation from Esau, and it remains true to this day. God's promises will not be fulfilled through just human strength, but God's promises are revealed. God's promises are fulfilled from above. Jacob does not say no to God, but rather struggles with God through questions and through many dark nights of the soul, and is transformed through the trial when he seeks God's blessing alone. And the question this morning I have for you is, have you experienced that kind of spiritual rebirth? Maybe you've been baptized, but are you still standing at the starting line of your journey with God these many years later? Are you still stuck in spiritual infancy? Or have you come to clasp onto God the way Jacob did? Well, here's one way you can tell. Are you still in spiritual infancy? You can tell if you have grown to trust your own strength less. Do you trust your own strength less now than you did before? That's a good thing. Are you clinging to Jesus more these days? That's a good thing. Are you learning to cling to Jesus more? That's a good thing. The one who came down to us, aware of our own weakness and our helplessness. Or are you still walking in your own strength? Trying to get your blessing on your own? Trusting your own compliance, trusting your own skills, trusting your own preparations and your own competencies. Are you trusting your own strength, or are you trusting God and waiting on Him? Maybe you're in that struggle right now. Maybe you're in the struggle. Maybe you're at the point of brokenness. Dawn is approaching. Your shoulder or your hip are wrenched, and you don't know where to go. This morning, if you're at the point where your strength fails, wondering what would happen next, the truth is there is only one way into the abundance and the grace of God, both figuratively and literally, and it is the way of surrender. Surrender is the way of hope, the way of holding on to Jesus as your only strength, not just on the day that you were baptized, but every day, including today. Now, this is hard, but the good news is that Jesus knows. Jesus knows it's difficult. Many years later, Jesus also wrestled at night in the garden all alone. Jesus knows all about the struggle, but he also knows about trusting God, because that is what he always did. even to the point of death. Jesus accomplished all that he did, not just because he was God in the flesh and had some sort of divine cheat code for life. Jesus overcame because he trusted God completely. At every moment, Jesus trusted God completely, and it is that life of perfect trust that he offers to us when we join him in the waters of baptism. His life becomes our life because he trusted in God, and then we ultimately trusted in him. Mark Love shares a story of a devastating betrayal that happened once in a church that he was a member of. A longtime member of the church was sideswiped by the news that her husband had had an affair. And what made it worse is that he had had an affair with someone else who also attended the church, the wife of a core volunteer of the congregation. And so there were two families that were torn apart by this betrayal. And the scandal raced through the congregation as the week unfolded. Everyone was talking about it. But to everyone's surprise, the following Sunday, this woman who had been betrayed showed up at church. She came through the door and she stood in front of the minister and his wife, and all three of them were speechless. They didn't know what to say. Now, the minister said he wanted to ask, like, what are you doing here? We thought you'd be ashamed to show your face here. They just stood there speechless until the woman, seemingly reading their minds, answered this unspoken question. I didn't know where else to go. This woman came back to church where this horrible thing had happened. She came back broken and trembling. Not because the church was necessarily good at dealing in human weakness, not necessarily because they were even ready to be a place of healing. But she came back because she was doing what Jacob did. She was holding on when she had nothing else left. Corrie ten Boom once said, "You'll never know that God is all you need until God is all you have." Jacob learned this lesson beside a river that marked the boundary of the promised land. And this woman, in her heartbreak, learned it in the pews of her own church. And maybe that's what God wants you to learn this morning. God invites those who struggle. God loves those who struggle and hang on. God wants us to understand that when our strength runs out, his grace can finally begin.